One night at the end of my shift, I received a call that was anything but ordinary. The night was particularly dark and oppressive, the air feeling thick with the sense of an impending storm. I was looking forward to finishing my shift and heading home when the radio crackled with a dispatch. An elderly woman living alone in an old house on the outskirts of town reported that someone was acting strangely in her home. Suspecting it might be a case of dementia or confusion, I headed to the address provided. The house was located in a remote area, far from the city center. It appeared old and dilapidated, with peeling paint and dirty windows. It looked like a relic of the past, weathered by time and neglect. When I arrived, I noticed the front door was ajar, which was unusual for this area where people generally keep their doors locked. I got out of the car and approached the door, which creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the house was dimly lit, with a musty, stale smell hanging in the air. I turned on my flashlight and took a step into the hallway. The first floor was cluttered with old furniture and dust-covered knickknacks, giving it a neglected, outdated feel. Family photos lined the walls, adding to the house's sense of having been frozen in time. I called out, announcing my presence, but there was no response. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the creaking floorboards beneath my feet and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. As I moved deeper into the house, I felt an increasing sense of unease, especially as I reached a closed door at the end of a narrow hallway. The air felt colder here and the light dimmer, as if the very atmosphere was trying to push me away. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Something about this door, this room, felt wrong, as if it was concealing something that shouldn't be disturbed. But duty called, so I took a deep breath, turned the knob, and pushed the door open. The room beyond was small and dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of a lamp on a bedside table. The bed was unmade, with stained sheets, as if someone had been lying there for days. In the corner of the room, huddled on the floor, was the woman who had made the call. She looked frail, in her late 70s, with thin white hair falling around her face. She wore a nightgown that was too big for her emaciated frame, the fabric hanging loosely around her shoulders. Her eyes were wide and bloodshot, filled with fear. "Ma, are you okay?" I asked, stepping closer. She didn't respond, just stared at me with an unblinking, fearful gaze. Her movements suddenly began to shift. She started sliding toward me in a slow, jerky manner, as if pulled by invisible strings. She wasn't using her hands or legs, just dragging herself across the floor with her back in an unnervingly mechanical way. My skin crawled, and I took a step back, trying to keep my composure. "Mom, what's happening?" I asked again, but she remained silent, her gaze fixed on me. The scene felt surreal and deeply unsettling, and I began to doubt my own senses. Was this a medical emergency or something more sinister? Her movements were too unnatural for any medical condition I knew. Finally, the woman stopped, just a few feet away from me. Her face was ghostly pale in the dim light. She tilted her head to one side, her eyes still locked on mine. Then, her voice, raspy and broken, whispered words that chilled me to the bone. "They're here." The terror in her voice was palpable. I didn't understand what she meant or who they were, but the fear was unmistakable. "Who's here, Ma?" I asked, trying to remain calm, but she only responded with a low, keening wail. The sound was one of pure, unadulterated fear, the kind that comes when you know something terrible is imminent and unavoidable. Suddenly, she lunged at me. It happened so quickly that I barely had time to react. One moment she was on the floor, and the next she was on her feet, clawing at my uniform with surprising strength. I struggled to push her away, but she was unexpectedly strong for her frail. Her nails dug into my skin, her breath hot and foul. "Get them out," she screamed, her voice high-pitched and frantic. "Get them out of my house." I managed to shove her back, and she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing and shaking. I was left panting, trying to process what had just happened, when I heard a soft shuffling sound coming from the hallway. I turned, hand instinctively reaching for my weapon, and saw them. At first they looked like shadows, tricks of the light on my tired mind. But as they emerged from the darkness, it became clear they were real. There were 3 figures, tall and thin, with elongated limbs and glowing eyes. Their movements were jerky and unnatural, just like the woman's had been. They advanced slowly, their faces becoming clearer as they drew closer. Their mouths twisted into grotesque, silent screams. It was then that I realized these were the woman had been so terrified of. I couldn't stay in the house with these horrifying entities. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors as I desperately searched for an exit. The house seemed endless, the darkness pressing in on me from all sides. Finally, I burst out of the front door and onto the porch. I looked back at the house, which now seemed even more menacing from outside. I could see the lights of my car in the distance, a beacon of safety amidst the night's terror. I got into my car, breathing heavily, knowing that the house and its malevolent occupants would remain with me long after I had left. The memory of that night and the unsettling figures that haunted the old house would stay with me forever. Story 2. The gray, foggy day began like any other. I was at the station, finishing up paperwork, when a distress call came over the radio. An 8-year-old boy was missing. His mother had seen him playing in the yard, but when she returned with water, he was gone. I grabbed my gear and headed to the scene. The house was located on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by dense woods. The mother, standing on the porch, was in a panic. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red from tears. She explained that she hadn't checked the woods, assuming the boy was just playing nearby. I organized additional search efforts and made my way to the forest. The forest was gloomy and dark, the trees intertwining and casting shadows all around. I began to search, pushing through the thick foliage and crunching branches. Soon, among the leaf-covered ground, I spotted a child's shoe. It was an alarming sign, but finding it didn't answer the main question: where was the boy? We continued the search, but there were no more traces of him. The forest seemed like an endless maze. With each passing hour, my anxiety grew. I returned to the house, where the mother, wrapped in a blanket, sat on the porch, her face pale with fear. As I got back into my car, I heard a strange sound. It was faint and distorted, resembling a child's voice coming from the woods. I knew it could be a trick of the senses, but fear compelled me to go back. I headed into the forest, following the sound. The forest grew increasingly oppressive. I continued walking until I saw the boy standing before me. His clothes were torn, and his eyes were hollow. I approached him, but he vanished. I was left alone in the darkness, and the fear that enveloped me was overwhelming. Emerging from the woods, I saw the mother still sitting on the porch. I brought her inside, locked the door, and stayed with her. I never saw the boy again. Sometimes on quiet nights I hear a distorted voice from the woods. I know it isn't him, but something else hiding in the shadows.